I want to start with this story. I was emptying out a humidifier this week that should have been emptied out a while ago, but it had two big containers of water. And I was upstairs on the second floor with my little toddler, and she was walking around the room, and I was trying to get this emptied or get it prepared to go downstairs in a way that she wouldn't go grab it and dump it, you know. And so I carried these two water jugs to the side of the balcony that overlook a hardwood floor, and was going to carry them down when she wasn't looking. And of course she runs over, and when she runs over, I try to move away from them so that she doesn't see them and think, oh, this looks like fun, let's stick our hands in here. And as I was doing that, I knocked over one of the buckets, and I knocked over that bucket, and it just threw a waterfall of water onto the wood floor below. So I go down and I start mopping it up with a towel that's down there, and I find myself realizing that I need to water the plants. So I'm down there and I go to water the plants after this waterfall comes over the balcony, and I pick up the other bucket of water from the humidifier, which is one of the reasons why I decided to water the plants, to try to save the water that was in there. So I walk down with it, and I'm going to water the aloe plant that's on the top of this shelf with the water from the humidifier, which is not a pitcher, mind you. So I start pouring it, and for any of you that have aloe plants, and this is a very overgrown aloe plant that has a lot of, I don't think fronds is the right word, but I start dumping the water, and it's a lot of water, so it just starts coming out. And I'm dumping it over the aloe plant, which acts like an umbrella, right? And it just starts spraying the water all over the room. And I said to myself immediately, without even thinking, I just said in my mind loudly, how am I supposed to get to that? Like, how is that supposed to work? Like, who did this? Who sticks an aloe plant on the top of a shelf and then, you know, has it in a way that if you water it, the water's not even going to get into the plant? How am I supposed to get to that? And then I heard it and I laughed, thinking, I'm the one who put the plant there. I'm the one who set it all up so it would perfectly create a waterfall onto the floor. How often do we listen to our self-talk? And how rooted and grounded is our self-talk in blame? Blame is an interesting thing. If we are aware of the self-talk regarding blame, around the idea of blame, we can recognize that the mind comes up with this a lot. The mind searches for whose fault it is, how did this happen, is it mine, is it someone else's? And sometimes having that perspective, right, keeps us from seeing ourselves, and it can keep us from seeing others. But what else can the blame game keep us from seeing? What else can the blame game keep us from seeing? I propose the possibility that the blame game keeps us from seeing God, keeps us from seeing the good. This type of thinking holds us hostage from our own growth and keeps us from seeing answered prayer. It keeps us from making adjustments that prosper our lives. It keeps us from being the change that we are looking for. It's a limited type of thinking. And when we engage it, we create more of it. When we exercise these patterns of blame, we build neural pathways in our minds. We teach our minds that when something is happening, this is the way you should think. Go on this path, go on this trail. And that's not always useful, is it? We build a psyche around this type of thinking. And that psyche, when used for something like blame, can turn into a maze. And this maze is designed to reinforce the mindset that it is created around. And that mindset then becomes a magnet. The type of thinking we use most is the type of thinking that begins to sound the loudest in our minds. And it's the type of thinking that then we create more of. So I'm going to share with you a story of two neighbors. One neighbor is a neighbor that has chickens. And these chickens run all around the neighborhood that this person lives in. They run all around all the time. They kick up the mulch. They get in flowers. It drives all the neighbors crazy. But they always let them out. This neighbor always lets them out. And always has a reason why they should be out, or how they got out, or how it happened again. And so there's never accountability around these little buggers engaging in the neighborhood. And one day, a neighbor of the neighbor sees the chickens out again. And the chickens are running through the front yard, and there's one chicken running quickly and starting to kick stuff up in the front yard and running through the front yard. And the neighbor follows it around to the backyard and then sees a fox. And then what do you think the fox did? The fox grabbed the chicken and, well, the chicken is in its freedom form, and the fox had a little bite to eat. So what happens when this neighbor that owns the chickens comes over? Now, mind you, the chickens were out all day, and the chickens are out, you know, all the time, on any given day, whenever they're out. The neighbor says, this person, my partner, you can fill in the blank, start watching this story. My partner was supposed to put the chickens away. They were only out for a few minutes, and they were supposed to come and put them away just a few minutes ago. Not blaming, but they were supposed to put them away. See that pattern in the mind? That pattern in the mind is a pattern that keeps us from seeing something could have happened at any time. The little piece about who was supposed to do what when is really irrelevant. That was just chance. That was just happenstance. That just happened to be the case this day in this moment. But this could have happened at any time. But when we engage in the blame game, when our minds are trained to look for whose fault or who's accountable, who should do it, who should pay for it, who should put it up, who should fill in the blank, then we begin to see only with that vision. And that vision blinds us. It blinds us to our own actions. It blinds us to our own minds. And it blinds us to the co-creation of our own reality. And it actually takes us out of the power seat in our lives and puts us into a passenger seat of the maze mind. The mind that can trick you, the mind that doesn't always act for you, but the ego's separate sense of self. Here's the other neighbor. The other neighbor in this story is a neighbor that cares about animal life. And so this neighbor has a neighbor that inherited a cat with their house, and they take care of this cat, even though it wasn't their cat. And they let the cat in the garage, and that's where the cat kind of lives. But other things get in the garage. Some of you are hearing this story. Other things get in the garage all the time and spray, or raccoons, and so it's really not working, right? And so the neighbor that hosts the cat is looking for how it can protect the cat in a better way, and figures out that if they get the right garage door hole, you know, for the cat to go through, if they get the right kind that has either a collar or a chip, it can be activated, and that cat can get in and out, but no one else can get in and out. So neighbor number 2 is having a conversation and hears about this, hears about the problem of the cat, and hears about the possible solution. And what does neighbor number 2 do? Neighbor number 2 starts getting online and orders the neighbor with the cat door, and says, I'd like to split it with you. We'd like to split it with you. Split the cost. See the difference? You've got a problem, and then you've got the person who's accountable, which would be the neighbor that owns the cat now, right? But you have another neighbor who has a mindset that doesn't look for blame, shame, problem, but looks for solutions and comes together to harmonize and to unify and to serve. We all, friends, have both neighbors in our minds. We are all three characters in this story. We are neighbor one, we are neighbor two, and we are the homeowner in the middle. So how do those psyches get activated? And how can we become more conscious of them so that we can invite in and allow in the good? When we engage in destructive thinking, when we use this mind temple that is so magnificent, so powerful, so potent, when we use it for blaming, shaming, whether it's ourselves or someone else, we sell everyone short. It leads us to narrow-mindedness. It leads us to a myopic vision. It leads us to a place where we can't question self and we can't question perspective, so we have less choices. We have fewer choices. It leaves us overly grounded in our own reality or our own perspective. The blame game, or always looking for whose fault someone is, rather than always asking how we can serve, or always looking for the solutions, or always looking for the good, or always taking something as an opportunity to exercise empathy and to just be present or be present with what we feel within. When we're activating that other part of the mind, what's the problem with that? It's very human, it's very normal. The problem is that we're not training the mind to look for solutions when we do that. The problem with not being accountable is that we take ourselves out of the power position to change things in our lives, in our environment, in our world, and in our own being. When we anchor ourselves in limited vision or limited perspective or limited reality rather than an expansive awareness, we fail to be the witness. In mindfulness practice, the reason we do meditation, the reason we engage in a mindfulness practice is to become the witness, so that we are not so entrenched in what our own learned set of conditions is that we're not recreating life, recreating patterns, recreating systems constantly according to the same blueprint that is limited, but in fact, we are expanding out. When we engage the witness self, we are expanding beyond our current capabilities. The practice of limited thinking begins to permeate our consciousness. It begins to become like a driver on the computer, like the installation program through which everything is run, the programming material. And one of the saddest parts about that is that what we do to others, if we blame, if we shame, we also do it to ourselves. And that's a harsh environment to live in. What we want is to become the bridge between realities. The witness allows us to do that. What we want is to become an avenue for healing. Empathy allows us to do that. What we want is to consciously and actively grow. Accountability allows us to do that, to become the vessel for good, the vessel for God. Dr. Brené Brown, an amazing woman who has shared so much about vulnerability and about the mind and really a spirituality around the mind as far as accountability and blame and empathy and vulnerability. She says this: how many of you go to that place when something bad happens? The first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? She says, I'd rather it be my fault than someone else's because it gives us some semblance of control. Blame, she goes on to say, is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. She goes on to say that blame is also just a way that we discharge our anger. She says, people who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. It's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Back to the story of two neighbors. One story is about a corrosive thinking that divides and that creates discord. The other story is about a unifying energy, an energy of healing, an energy that is a bridge. It is part of our spiritual practice to allow the lower energies, the lower parts of self, the lower parts of our thinking mind that we all have, not to annihilate them, but to allow them to serve the soul, to serve the spirit, to serve the higher aspect of our being. The ego is here to serve the soul, and we are here to be a vessel of good. I was gifted this book recently for Mama's Day, and it's called Mary Magdalene Revealed, and it is a book about the Gospel of Mary, which is an apocryphal book discovered in 1896. So it's not part of the general Bible that you'll see, but it's part of the Apocrypha. And it is the Gospel of Mary, Mary Magdalene. And I want to just share a little bit from a passage that I recently read. It says this, in the Gospel of Mary, it says, God is not referred to as the Father or the Mother in the Gospel of Mary, but simply as the good. That is how unity and old school unity writing also refers to God as the good. The great good, that has no opposite. It goes on to say, the gospel stresses the importance of integration. It is not sin, but ignorance of our own true nature that creates suffering. We have a template, an image that arises or exists beyond this realm and yet seeks its full expression here. Our work is to reunite with that template, our own angel. This is Mary's emphasis in Mary 5:8. For he has united us and made us true human beings. She goes on to talk about what true human beings are. We are incomplete without remembering this other half of what it means to be human. To be a true human being is to unite the ego or self with the nous or soul. A true human comes into being when we contemplate the connection that exists between the created world and the creating world. The human is in the middle. So being human is a privilege and a purpose itself, to be the bridge between the created world and the creating world. It goes on to say, we are capable of integrating the self and the soul, the image and the analog, the human aspect of us with the eternal self that never changes. That is our call, to integrate these aspects of self. So I invite you to take on a couple of inquiries this week, to spend a little time in meditation or journaling to reflect on these ideas. When blame comes up, and when we know that's a part of our mind, and it's probably 99% assured that even if we say, I don't do that, we do. Because it's part of the human condition, right? It's just how the mind works. But we can use mindfulness tools to become more aware and to also co-create a more positive future and create the mind that is aligned with the soul, which is about love, which is about healing, which is about wholeness, which is about forgiveness, which is about divine ideas or solutions. So here are a couple of exercises. Look at self-forgiveness. How good are we at self-forgiveness? If we have a hard time engaging in self-forgiveness, the mind often shifts to blame. The next is accountability. Kind of do a little journaling exercise maybe in the history of your life. Did you learn that it was healthy to be accountable? Or did you learn that it was surrounded in shame or blame? Was accountability forced on you in a way that created shame or blame? Because if it does create that and accountability isn't an empowering thing, then we learn not to do it. We learn to, in fact, just reinforce what we experienced, which was the shame or blame. But the moment we begin to reprogram the mind or accept the spiritual truth that accountability actually puts us into the creative seat, then we can unfold our true creative potential. And here's the third one. Were mistakes bad? Were mistakes wrong? Rather than being invitations for learning, rather than being natural parts of life and existence, and rather than being even good. Were mistakes wrong in your history? Those are three things to look at: self-forgiveness, accountability, and mistakes. As Sig Paulson, the Unity author and minister, said, "You will be surprised at how many areas of your being have been laboring under the burden of disapproval." When we have a heavy energy of disapproval within our own being for ourselves or for others, it creates a system of limitation. I was looking at a presentation, a piece of a talk on suicide by Jordan Peterson. And he gave this advice, and it's an incredible piece of advice. And it goes into like, how do we move from this moment forward into the future? And he said, try to drag the least amount of misery forward. Try to drag the least amount of misery forward. I want to close with the knowing, the truth, that the great good is everywhere present all of the time, that we can actually think our way into experiencing and seeing and co-creating more of it. And with this affirmation from Sig Paulson, I invite us to deepen our practice. Sig Paulson, in your power to be. I approve of myself as a human being, a growing, unfolding, confident, enthusiastic representative of love on earth. I approve of myself where and as I am, in the assurance that love is already moving me out of any state of limitation. I do what I see infinite love doing. I put the stamp of approval on myself as its instrument of expression. Namaste.